Jake Thompson had always dreamed of exploring distant planets, but he never imagined it would end like this. The research shuttle shook violently as it entered the atmosphere of Kepler 440b, a planet that scientists back on Earth had called potentially habitable. Right now, it felt anything but habitable. Come on, Jake muttered, gripping the controls as warning lights flashed red across the dashboard. The storm outside was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Lightning crackled in colors that didn't exist on Earth, deep purples and brilliant greens that lit up the alien sky. The wind howled like a living thing, tossing his small craft around like a toy. Jake was a biologist, not a pilot. He'd learned to fly research shuttles as part of his training, but this was way beyond his skill level. The automated systems were failing one by one, and the backup generators were already working overtime. He'd been studying alien plant life for the past 3 years, traveling from planet to planet, but he'd never faced anything like this. The shuttle's hull groaned under the pressure. Through the thick viewing window, Jake could see the ground. Rushing up to meet him, there were no landing pads down there, no rescue teams waiting, just endless stretches of what looked like silver grass waving in the storm, dotted with strange crystal formations that seemed to glow with their own inner light. Emergency beacon activated, the computer announced in its calm, mechanical voice. Signal strength, weak, estimated rescue time, unknown. That was the word Jake had been dreading. He was billions of miles from Earth, on a planet that barely anyone had studied. The research station that had sent him here wouldn't even know he was in trouble. For another 6 hours, when his scheduled check-in time arrived, the shuttle hit the ground hard. Jake's safety harness cut into his chest as he was thrown forward, then back. The world spun around him in a blur of sparks and flying debris. Metal screamed against rock, and then suddenly, everything went quiet. When Jake opened his eyes, his head was pounding. Blood trickled down his forehead from a cut above his left eye. The shuttle was tilted at a crazy angle, and through the cracked window, he could see that one wing was completely torn off. The other wing was bent at an impossible angle, and smoke was rising from the engine compartment. He tried to move and immediately regretted it. His left arm hung uselessly at his side, and every breath sent sharp pains through his ribs. But he was alive, and that was more than he'd expected a few minutes ago. The emergency kit was still strapped to the wall. Thank goodness, inside. He found basic medical supplies, a water purification tablet, some emergency food bars, and a small communication device. He activated the device, but the screen showed only static. The storm was still raging outside, interfering with any signals. For the first day, Jake stayed inside the wrecked shuttle, hoping the storm would pass. He bandaged his head wound as best he could, and tried to splint his arm using pieces of broken equipment. The pain was constant, but manageable. What worried him more was the strange sound the shuttle was making, a low groaning that suggested the whole structure might collapse at any moment. By the second day, the storm had calmed, but Jake's condition was getting worse. His arm was swelling, and he was running a fever. The cut on his head had become infected despite his attempts to clean it. He knew he needed to find help, but where? This planet was supposed to be uninhabited. He gathered what supplies he could carry and stepped outside for the first time. The alien world was both beautiful and terrifying. The silver grass reached up to his knees, and when he touched it, it seemed to shimmer and change color. The crystal formations he'd seen from the air were even more amazing up close. They were taller than him, and they hummed with a low, musical sound that he could feel in his bones. The air was breathable, which was a relief. It tasted slightly sweet and felt thicker than Earth's atmosphere. In the distance, he could see what looked like mountains, but they were a deep blue color and seemed to shift and change as he watched them. Jake started walking toward the mountains. He figured that if there was any chance of finding shelter or help, it would be there. But with his injured arm and the unfamiliar terrain, progress was slow. Every step was a struggle, and he had to stop frequently to rest. On the third day, everything went wrong at once. Jake's fever spiked, and he began seeing things that weren't there, or at least, he hoped they weren't there. Strange shadows seemed to move in the corners of his vision, and he kept hearing voices calling his name. His water ran out that morning, and the purification tablets weren't working on the planet's water sources, which had a purple tint that made him nervous about drinking them. By evening, Jake knew he was in serious trouble. His legs felt like rubber, and he could barely keep his eyes open. The infection from his head wound was spreading, and his arm was now completely useless. He collapsed next to one of the crystal formations, using it as a backrest. "This is it," he whispered to himself, looking up at the alien sky. The moons hung overhead, casting everything in a pale, blue light. The stars were different here, patterns he'd never seen before, constellations that reminded him of how far from home he really was. He closed his eyes, expecting to drift off into unconsciousness, maybe forever. But then he felt something warm touch his forehead. At first, he thought it was just a fever, but the touch was gentle, almost caring. He forced his eyes open and saw the most incredible sight of his life. A figure knelt beside him. But it wasn't human. The being had the general shape of a person, but its skin seemed to glow with a soft, white light. Patterns of brighter light moved across its arms and face like living tattoos. Its eyes were larger than human eyes, and they seemed to hold ancient wisdom. Jake tried to speak, but only a weak croak came out. The being placed a hand on his chest, and immediately the pain began to fade. The fever broke, and for the first time in days, he could think clearly. "Who are you?" he managed to whisper. The being didn't answer with words, but somehow Jake understood. He was safe. He was going to be okay, and his life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. The last thing he remembered before drifting off to sleep was being lifted carefully and carried through the alien landscape toward a destination that would become his new home. Jake woke up on the softest surface he'd ever felt in his life. For a moment, he thought he was back on Earth, maybe in a hospital bed. But then he opened his eyes and saw the ceiling above him. It wasn't made of metal or concrete, but seemed to be carved from a single piece of translucent crystal that glowed with warm, golden light. He sat up slowly, expecting pain from his injuries, but felt nothing. His arm moved perfectly, and when he touched his forehead, the cut was completely gone. Not even a scar remained. He looked down at his hands in amazement. Even small scratches he'd had for months were gone. "You're awake," a voice said softly. Jake turned and saw her, the being who had saved him, in the better light. He could see she was definitely female, though not quite human. Her skin had a pearl-like quality, and those moving patterns of light were even more beautiful than he'd remembered. She was tall, maybe 6 feet, with long silver hair that seemed to float around her face as if she was underwater. "Thank you," Jake said, his voice still rough. "You saved my life." She tilted her head, and he realized she didn't understand his words. But when she looked into his eyes, he felt something incredible happen. Images flashed through his mind, not his own. Memories, but hers. He saw himself from her perspective, collapsed and dying by the crystal formation. He felt her concern, her decision to help him, and her curiosity about what he was. "You're reading my mind," he said, amazed rather than frightened. She smiled, and the expression was so warm and familiar that it made his heart skip. More images came. This time, she was showing him her world. He saw a vast city built inside and around massive crystal caves, with bridges of light connecting different levels. Hundreds of beings like her moved through the spaces, all glowing with that same inner light. Over the next few days, Jake learned that her name was something like Zara, though the actual sound was more musical than any human language could produce. She was what he would call a healer, but her abilities went far beyond anything Earth medicine could achieve. She could mend bones with a touch, cure infections with her mind, and even repair damaged organs by channeling some kind of energy through her hands. The place where he was staying was her home, carved into the living rock of the cave system. Everything was organic and flowing, no sharp corners or straight lines. The walls themselves provided light, and the furniture seemed to grow from the floor. Water flowed in streams through channels in the walls, and the air always smelled fresh and clean. Jake was fascinated by everything, and Zara seemed equally curious about him. She would spend hours each day teaching him about her people, who called themselves the Velthari. Through their mental connection, he learned that they had been on this planet for thousands of years, living in harmony with the crystal formations. That were actually living beings in their own right. The Velthari were peaceful but sophisticated. They had no cars or machines like humans did, but their biotechnology was incredibly advanced. They could grow buildings, create tools from living matter, and even travel through space using ships that were more like giant living creatures than mechanical vessels. What surprised Jake most was their social structure. Unlike human societies, the Velthari were led by women. The strongest and wisest females made all the important decisions, while males took care of children, art, and spiritual matters. It wasn't that males were considered less important. Both genders were valued equally, but for different reasons. Zara, he learned, was someone very special among her people. She was the daughter of the tribe's leader, a position that came with both privilege and responsibility. She was expected to choose a mate soon, and that choice would affect the entire community's future. As weeks passed, Jake began to understand the language through their mental connection. He could speak basic phrases now, though his pronunciation made Zara laugh. She had a beautiful laugh that sounded like silver bells ringing in the wind. He also began to understand the politics of her world. There were several young Velthari, males who wanted to be chosen as Zara's mate. Jake had seen them round the caves, tall, handsome beings with impressive light patterns on their skin. They were warriors, artists, and leaders in their own right. The more Jake learned about this, the more uncomfortable he became. He was an outsider, a different species entirely. He had no place in their society, no role to play in their future. Yet he couldn't deny what was happening between him and Zara. Every day they spent together, their connection grew stronger. It wasn't just the mental link anymore. They would sit together in the evenings, watching the alien sunset through the crystal walls. Zara would show him how to make the crystals sing by touching them in certain patterns. Jake would tell her about Earth, about trees and oceans and snow, things her desert planet had never seen. One evening, as they sat by a pool of glowing water, Zara took his hand. The touch sent warmth through his entire body, and he felt her emotions as clearly as his own. She cared for him, more than cared, but there was sadness there too, and worry. "What's wrong?" he asked. Through their connection, she showed him. Her mother, the tribe leader, had announced that Zara must choose a mate before the next full moon. It was tradition, and it was necessary for political reasons. Other tribes were watching, and Zara's choice would determine future alliances. Jake felt his heart sink. He understood what this meant. Soon, Zara would have to choose one of the eligible Velthari males, and he would be what? A friend, a pet, a curiosity to be studied. "I should leave," he said quietly. "I don't belong here." Zara's grip on his hand tightened, and her emotions flooded through him, fear, sadness, and something else, something that made his breath catch in his throat. "No," she said in his language, one of the few words she'd learned. "You belong." That night, Jake lay awake staring at the glowing ceiling, wondering what she meant. He was a human on an alien world, millions of miles from home. How could he possibly belong here? But as he drifted off to sleep, he realized that for the first time in his life, he felt truly at home. He just didn't know yet how much his life was about to change. The morning of the ceremony arrived faster than Jake had hoped. He stood at the edge of Zara's dwelling, watching the entire tribe gather in the great crystal chamber. It was the largest space he'd seen in the cave system, a natural amphitheater, carved by time and shaped by the Velthari into something breathtaking. Hundreds of glowing beings filled the space, their light patterns creating a sea of moving colors. The air hummed with excitement and nervous energy. Jake had never felt so out of place in his life. Among all these beautiful, luminous people, he looked pale and ordinary. "You should not be here," a voice said behind him. Jake turned to see Kale, one of Zara's suitors. He was everything Jake wasn't: tall, confident, with intricate light patterns that marked him as a warrior. His silver hair was braided with crystals, and his presence commanded respect. "I know," Jake replied quietly. "I'll leave after the ceremony." Kale studied him for a long moment. "You care for her?" It wasn't a question. Jake nodded, not trusting his voice. "Then you understand why this is necessary," Kale continued. "She must choose someone who can lead beside her, someone who belongs to our people, not an outsider who will be gone when his people come for him." Jake's heart clenched. Kale was right, of course. Even if Jake stayed, he would always be different, always be the strange human who fell from the sky. Zara deserved better than that. The ceremony began with the sound of crystal chimes filling the air. Zara's mother, the tribal leader, stood at the center of the chamber. She was ancient even by Velthari's standards, her light patterns deep and complex like living artwork. When she spoke, her voice carried to every corner of the space. "Today, my daughter chooses her mate," she announced. "The one she selects will stand beside her as leader of our people. This choice will bind not just two hearts, but two futures." Jake watched from the shadows as Zara entered the chamber. She was magnificent. Her ceremonial robes seemed to be made of captured starlight, and her natural glow was brighter than he'd ever seen it. She moved with grace and purpose, but Jake could feel her nervousness through their mental connection. 3 males stepped forward to present themselves. First was Kale, who spoke of his victories in battle and his dedication to protecting the tribe. His light patterns flared impressively as he demonstrated his warrior abilities. The crowd murmured approval. Next came Dren, an artist whose creations were known throughout their world. He offered Zara a sculpture made of living crystal that bloomed and changed shape. As she watched, his words were poetry, speaking of beauty and creation and the art of leadership. Finally, there was Thane, the youngest but perhaps most ambitious. He was a scholar who had discovered new ways to communicate with the planet's crystal beings. His presentation was about progress and expanding their knowledge of the universe. All three were impressive. Any of them would make a fine leader and partner for Zara. Jake felt smaller and more insignificant with each presentation. He began to back away, thinking it would be easier to leave now, before seeing Zara make her choice. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of stepping toward one of the three males, Zara turned toward the crowd. Her eyes found Jake's, and even from across the chamber, he felt the full force of her determination. "I thank these worthy males for their presentations," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the space. "But my heart has already chosen." A murmur ran through the crowd. This wasn't how the ceremony usually went. The tribal leader frowned, clearly confused. "Daughter," she said carefully, "you must choose from those who have presented themselves. I choose according to the ancient laws." Zara replied, "I choose the one who has proven himself worthy through his actions, not his words." She began walking toward Jake, and with each step, the crowd's murmur grew louder. Some voices sounded angry, others confused. Jake stood frozen, unable to believe what was happening. "Zara," he whispered as she approached. "What are you doing?" She stopped in front of him, close enough that he could see the determination in her large eyes. "What I should have done days ago," she said softly. Then she turned to face the crowd, her hand finding his. "This human saved our healing crystals from the storm damage when he first arrived. He shared his knowledge freely, asking nothing in return. He has shown wisdom and counsel and courage in crisis. Most importantly, he has shown me what it means to love without condition." The chamber erupted in shocked voices. Some called out in anger, others in support. But Zara wasn't finished. "According to our oldest laws, I have the right to choose any being I deem worthy, regardless of their origin. I claim this human as my chosen mate." Jake felt the world spinning around him. This was really happening. Zara was claiming him in front of her entire tribe, knowing it would cause controversy, knowing it might even be dangerous. "You can't," he said, his voice barely audible over the crowd's noise. "I'm not one of you. I don't even know if I can stay here." Zara's hands moved to frame his face, and suddenly their mental connection opened fully. He felt everything she felt, her love for him, her certainty that this was right. her willingness to face whatever consequences came. Then we will make a new path, she said, speaking loud enough for everyone to hear. Together, the tribal leader stepped forward, her expression unreadable. This is unprecedented, she said. The council must discuss. There is nothing to discuss, Zara interrupted. Something she had never done before. I have made my choice according to our laws. It is done. She turned back to Jake, and he saw something in her eyes that made his heart race. She was asking him, without words, to trust her, to take this leap into the unknown with her. Jake looked out at the crowd of alien faces, some hostile, some curious, some supportive. He thought about his life on Earth, his research, his plans for the future. All of it seemed distant now, like memories from someone else's life. I accept, he said, his voice growing stronger. I accept your claim. The crowd fell silent, even. The crystals seemed to stop humming. In that moment, Jake realized there was no going back. Whatever happened next, his life would never be the same. Zara smiled, and her light patterns flared brighter than ever. Then it is sealed, she announced. Before all witnesses, I claim this human as my mate, and he has accepted. The silence stretched for what felt like forever. Then, slowly, some voices began to call out in support. Others remained quiet or openly disapproving. But it was done. There was no ceremony to reverse it, no way to undo what had just happened. Jake was now the claimed mate of the future leader of the Velthari, and he had no idea what that meant for either of them. The days following the claiming ceremony were the hardest of Jake's life. He thought the ceremony itself was challenging, but dealing with the aftermath was even worse. Half the tribe seemed to support Zara's choice, while the other half acted like he committed some terrible crime just by existing. Jake found himself constantly watched wherever he went. Some Velthari would nod politely when they saw him, but others would turn away or whisper among themselves. The worst part was the council meetings. Every day, tribal elders would gather to discuss what Zara had done and whether it should be allowed to stand. You've put us all in danger, Thane told him one morning. Thane was one of the males who had wanted to be chosen, and he wasn't handling the rejection well. What happens when your people come looking for you? What happens when they see what you've done here? Jake didn't have an answer. He'd been thinking about the same thing, somewhere out there. A rescue team was probably searching for him. Eventually, they would find this planet, and then what? Would they try to take him back? Would they see his relationship with Zara as some kind of alien mind control? The pressure was getting to him. Jake found himself questioning everything. Was he really good enough for Zara? Could he actually help lead her people? He was just a biologist who'd gotten lost in space. What did he know about leadership or politics? Zara sensed his doubts through their mental connection. One evening, she found him sitting alone in the crystal gardens, staring up at the alien stars. You're thinking of leaving, she said. It wasn't a question. Maybe I should, Jake replied. Look at what I've caused. Your people are divided. Some of them hate me. Your mother barely speaks to you anymore. Zara sat beside him, her presence warm and comforting. Change is always difficult, she said. But that doesn't mean it's wrong. I don't know how to be what you need me to be, Jake admitted. I don't know how to lead people or make important decisions. I study plants and animals. That's all I've ever been good at. Then perhaps that's exactly what we need, Zara said. Quietly, before Jake could ask what she meant, alarms began sounding throughout the cave system. The crystals flashed red, and Jake could hear voices shouting in the distance. Something was very wrong. They rushed to the main chamber, where Zara's mother was addressing a crowd of frightened Velthari. The Korthik have crossed our borders, she announced. They're moving toward the sacred crystals. Jake had heard about the Korthik during his time with the tribe. They were another alien species that lived on the planet, but unlike the peaceful Velthari, they were aggressive and territorial. For years, there had been an uneasy peace between the two groups. But apparently, that peace was ending. How many? Zara asked, stepping forward. At least 200, one of the scouts reported. They have weapons we've never seen before, energy blasters that can shatter our crystals. Jake felt his heart sink. The crystals weren't just buildings to the Velthari. They were living beings, partners in their civilization. If the Korthik destroyed them, it would be like destroying the tribe's family members. We need to evacuate, Kale said. Move everyone to the deep caves until they pass. No, Zara said firmly. If we abandon the crystals, the Korthik will destroy them all. We have to fight. With what? Thane asked. We're healers and artists, not warriors. We have maybe 50 people who know how to fight, and they have energy weapons. Jake listened to the debate with growing frustration. The Velthari were talking about fighting or running, but nobody was considering other options. His scientific mind was already working on the problem, thinking about what he knew of both species. What if we don't have to fight them? He said suddenly. The room fell silent. Everyone turned to look at him, and Jake felt his face burn with embarrassment. Who was he to suggest strategies to these people? Explain, Zara's mother said, her voice neutral. Jake took a deep breath. The Korthik are territorial, right? They're not attacking because they hate you. They're attacking because they want something. What if we could give them what they want, without giving up what you need? They want our crystals, Kale said. There's no compromise there. But why do they want them? Jake pressed. What do they use crystals for? The room was quiet as people thought about this. Finally, Trent spoke. Energy, he said slowly. They use crystals to power their technology, right? Jake said, getting excited. So they don't need living crystals specifically. They just need crystal energy. What if we could show them how to grow their own crystals instead of stealing yours? That's impossible, Thane said. Crystal growing takes decades of knowledge, and not if we combine your biotechnology with human agricultural techniques. Jake interrupted. I've been studying your crystals for weeks. They're not that different from certain plants on Earth. With the right conditions, we could probably grow small energy crystals in months instead of years. The room erupted in discussion. Some people thought the idea was brilliant. Others thought it was insane. But Jake could see Zara's mother considering it seriously. Even if this could work, she said finally, how do we convince the Korthik to listen? They're not known for their patience. We show them, Jake said. I'll go talk to them. Absolutely not, Zara said immediately. It's too dangerous. I'm the only one here who's not from this planet, Jake pointed out. They might be more willing to listen to a neutral party. Plus, if something goes wrong, you haven't lost one of your own people. The debate continued for hours, but eventually, Jake's plan was accepted. He would approach the Korthik under a flag of truce, accompanied by Zara and a small group of crystal growers. They would demonstrate the crystal growing technique and offer to teach it to the Korthik in exchange for peace. It was dangerous and uncertain, but it was better than fighting a war they couldn't win. As Jake prepared for the mission, he realized something had changed. The Velthari who had been avoiding him were now looking at him with respect. Even Thane admitted that the plan was clever. Maybe. You do belong here after all, Kale said as they prepared to leave. You think differently than we do. Sometimes that's exactly what a leader needs. Jake felt a surge of confidence. Maybe he couldn't be the kind of leader the Velthari were used to, but perhaps he could be the kind of leader they needed. Someone who could see problems from a different angle, who could find solutions that others missed. As they set out toward the Korthik army, Jake held Zara's hand tightly. Whatever happened next, they would face it together, and for the first time since the claiming ceremony, he felt like he might actually deserve the trust she'd placed in him. The meeting with the Korthik was unlike anything Jake had ever experienced. They were massive beings, nearly 8 feet tall, with thick, rocky skin that looked like armor. Their eyes glowed red, and when they spoke, their voices sounded like grinding stone. Everything about them screamed danger. But Jake had learned something important during his time with the Velthari. Appearances could be deceiving, despite their frightening looks. The Korthik listened to his proposal with surprising patience. Their leader, a giant named Gromax, even seemed intrigued by the idea of growing their own crystals. You would teach us this? Gromax asked, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. We would, Jake replied, trying to keep his voice steady, in exchange for peace between our peoples. The demonstration went better than Jake had hoped, using techniques He learned from studying both Earth agriculture and Velthari biotechnology. They showed the Korthik how to cultivate small energy crystals in portable growing chambers. The crystals wouldn't be as powerful as the ancient ones the Velthari cherished, but they would provide plenty of energy for the Korthak's needs. Gromax tested one of the demonstration crystals, connecting it to a device that immediately began glowing with power. "This is acceptable," he said finally. "We will try your method." The peace agreement was signed that very day. The Korthik would receive crystal growing technology and training, while the Velthari would keep their sacred crystals safe. It was a win for everyone, and Jake had been the one to make it happen. When they returned to the cave system, the entire tribe was waiting for them. The welcome was unlike anything Jake had experienced. People who had been cold to him before were now cheering his name. Even the tribal elders who had questioned Zera's choice were now nodding with approval. "You did well," Zera's mother said to him privately. "Perhaps my daughter chose more wisely than I first thought." But the real test came 3 days later, when Jake's communication device suddenly crackled to life. After months of silence, he was finally receiving a signal from the human rescue team. "This is Commander Rivera of the Earth Alliance rescue ship Horizon," a voice said through the static. "We've been searching for you for months. Please respond if you can hear this." Jake stared at the device in his hands, his heart racing. This was it, the moment he'd been both hoping for and dreading. He could leave this planet, return to his old life, pretend none of this had ever happened. Or he could make a choice that would change everything. Zera found him sitting alone with the communicator, staring at it like it might explode. "They've come for you," she said simply. "Yes?" Jake replied, "They have. And what will you tell them?" Jake took a deep breath. Over the past few months, he discovered things about himself he never knew existed. He found courage he didn't know he had, wisdom he didn't know he possessed, and love deeper than anything he'd ever imagined. Going back to Earth now would feel like trying to squeeze back into clothes that no longer fit. "I'll tell them I'm exactly where I belong," he said, activating the communicator. The conversation with Commander Rivera was difficult. She was shocked to learn that Jake had not only survived but had integrated into an alien society. She was even more shocked when he explained about Zera and the claiming ceremony. "You can't be serious," Rivera said. "You're talking about staying on an alien planet with beings we know nothing about." "The psychological effects alone," Commander, Jake interrupted. "I know how this sounds, but I'm not under any kind of alien influence. I'm thinking clearly. And I'm making this choice freely. I want to stay." "That's not possible," Rivera said firmly. "My orders are to bring you back to Earth for debriefing. Then I have a different proposal." Jake said, "What if I stayed here as an official ambassador? Think about it. We've made contact with not one but 2 alien species. This could be the beginning of interstellar cooperation. Humanity needs someone here to establish relationships, to learn about their technology, to build bridges between our worlds." The silence on the other end of the communicator stretched for a long time. Finally, Rivera spoke again. "I'll need to contact Earth Command. This is way above my authority level." The answer came 2 days later. Earth Command was intrigued by the possibility of establishing humanity's first interstellar embassy. They agreed to let Jake stay, but only if he maintained regular contact and provided detailed reports about both alien species. It was perfect. Jake would get to stay with Zera and her people, but he would also be serving humanity by building relationships with their new alien neighbors. He would be the bridge between worlds, exactly what he'd always dreamed of being. The bonding ceremony between Jake and Zera was held 1 month later. It was a beautiful fusion of traditions from both their worlds. Jake spoke vows in the Velthari language, promising to protect and cherish Zera and to serve her people as his own. Zera spoke in English, promising to love Jake through all the challenges their unique situation would bring. The ceremony involved a telepathic linking that was deeper than anything they'd shared before. For a moment, Jake felt like he was seeing the universe through Zera's eyes, all the beauty and wonder of existence, all the possibilities that lay ahead for both their species. As the months passed, Jake settled into his new role. He established a communication center that allowed regular contact between Earth and the Velthari homeworld. He helped negotiate trade agreements and cultural exchanges. He even mediated disputes between the Velthari and the Korthik. When misunderstandings arose, the work was challenging but incredibly rewarding. Jake felt like he was making a real difference, not just for himself but for the future of all three species. He was exactly where he was meant to be. The biggest surprise came almost a year after the claiming ceremony. Zara approached him one evening with news that made his heart skip a beat. "We're going to have a child," she said, her light patterns glowing brighter than ever. Jake stared at her in amazement. He'd known that Vilthari and humans were biologically compatible. Their mental connection had proven that much, but he never imagined they could actually have children together. "Are you sure?" he asked. "The healers confirmed it today," Zara replied. "Our child will be something new. Part human, part Velthari. There'll be a bridge between our worlds, just like us." Jake pulled her into his arms, feeling overwhelmed with joy and wonder. Their child would grow up knowing both cultures, speaking both languages, understanding both worlds. They would be living proof that love could transcend any barrier, even the vast distances between stars. As Jake held Zara and thought about their future, he remembered that moment months ago, when she claimed him in front of her entire tribe. At the time, he'd been terrified and uncertain. Now he understood that it had been the first step in a journey that would change not just his life, but the future of multiple worlds. He couldn't have said no to Zara that day, not because he was forced to accept, but because his heart had already known what his mind was still learning. Sometimes the most important moments in life look like endings when they're actually beginnings. And this, Jake knew, was just the beginning.